So my friend on Gab posted a book that was about Ron Paul's 2012 presidential primary campaign, and the book deals with the kind of fraud that was perpetrated against Ron Paul and his supporters, and ultimately the public, who this video is about democratic theory. So what I want to talk about are what actually happens in the real world, and then whether this stuff can be said to whether this stuff meshes with what we have to expect in practice based on democratic theory. So, the fraud that was perpetrated against Ron Paul in 2012 by the Republican National Committee was organized, was malicious, and did affect the democratic process by not allowing the public, the general Republican voter spread across the country in these different states where they have primaries, didn't allow the voter to have a fair shot at judging these candidates. One thing that happens is everybody looks at the performance of candidates in other primaries to decide if they want to vote for people. So you look at how they just or did the previous week, and then it comes to your state, and you say, well, this candidate didn't get any support, so they must not really be a serious person, so I'm going to cast my vote for a different candidate. Well, if the Republican National Committee is stuffing ballot boxes and trying to organize people to destroy the candidacy of one of the people participating in the primary, then they're directly interfering with the democratic process, right? They're undermining democracy. The institutions don't work. Now, maybe it's just a Republican problem, right? Well, the first thing I thought of was Bernie Sanders. So we know that in this most recent election, so 2012, there's this evidence of organized high-level Republican fraud against democracy. And then in 2016, the Democrats, the DNC, were basically doing the exact same thing to Bernie Sanders. Instead of the National Committee operating as an impartial organ that treats the candidates fairly, just as in the Republican case, the party elites had already decided who they wanted to win. And not only had they decided who they wanted to win, they said that a fair contest will undermine our preferred candidate to such a degree that we will not tolerate this. So let's say that Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton go head to head. 35% of the public votes for Bernie Sanders. The other 2/3 of the Democratic public vote for Hillary Clinton. Well, that doesn't look so great going into the general election. You got a third of the voters third of the Democrats even, who didn't like the candidate that was chosen. So that kind of thing is intolerable whether we're talking about the Democrats or the Republicans. They want to see their preferred candidate go in with this huge mandate that supposedly will put up a strong front. So they sacrifice honesty, they sacrifice truth, fairness, and they choose to undermine democracy because they don't really care about the process. They don't believe in the democratic rules. They don't believe in any of that shit. They just want to win. So, this seems to be not an exception and not just something that happens when there's a presidential election or something like that at stake. There are many other candidates. You can go look at Cynthia McKinney, who was a Democratic congresswoman, I believe, from Atlanta in Georgia, and she was fundraised out of existence and supplanted by Keith Ellison, who appears to be one of the lowest IQ national representatives to have ever entered the United States House. Keith Ellison is the guy. I'm sorry, I'm not talking about Keith Ellison. That's the wrong person. I'm sorry, I'm completely getting off track here. Hank Johnson, pardon me. Hank Johnson. Sorry to Keith Ellison if you ever see this. Hank Johnson is one of the lowest IQ people to ever sit in the House of Representatives. Hank Johnson thought that Guam, the military base, which is an island in the Pacific Ocean, that if the planes were landing on one side, that the island would potentially tip over. Keith Ellison, there I go again. Hank Johnson actually thought that this might happen. So the powers that be in the United States, whoever they are behind the Democratic Party and the Republican Party too, said that Cynthia McKinney's views on Israel and the Middle East were so offensive that she had to be replaced with the stupidest guy that they could find. Um, call that how you like it. Now, on the Republican side, you could look at people like Patrick Little or Paul Nehlen. Both of those guys have views, again, on Israel and the Middle East that do not fit with the political establishment in the Republican Party, which it's the same thing as the Democrats with Cynthia McKinney. So both of those guys end up being completely boxed out of their state GOP. Like, these people can't even go to meetings. They won't even be let in the door. And in both cases, those guys are really just pushing like an America First nationalist agenda. So based on a lot of the stuff that you see in the Democratic Party, people who are still able to get in the door, people who are still able to promote their ideas, it doesn't really make any sense. And the same thing too with the Republican Party. You've got plenty of people there who, like, let's take the Mitt Romney that Ron Paul was running against. Mitt Romney, who pretty much would be comfortable with selling any American job overseas if he could market it as efficiency, helpful for business, or to promote, the growth of our GDP by 0.0000001% or something like that. They just don't care. So anybody who's promoting something different than this uniparty elite just gets completely boxed out, and we're talking about this happening at the national level, the state level, and the local level. As far as I can figure out, anything that these people have any interest in, they will box you out if you don't agree with them. So where does this leave us in terms of democratic theory? And it would probably be helpful for you if you consider yourself to be a supporter and a proponent of democracy, for you to sit down and think, what would have to be true for a democratic political system to be in effect and to be operating? So ask yourself, let's see if I have this quote here from Ron Paul. Okay. Ron Paul says, "I've been in this business a long time, and believe me, there is essentially no difference from one administration to another, no matter what the platforms are. The foreign policy stays the same, the monetary policy stays the same. There's no proposal for any real cuts, and both parties support it." So we know that when we get a Republican or a Democrat, there's a little bit of a difference, right? There's like some stuff about transgenders being in the military or not, or the president supports gay marriage, or the president doesn't support gay marriage. There's some of that kind of stuff. But for the most part, all of our policies stay the same. There's some marginal tax cuts at issue, or some marginal tax increases. There's some stuff about entitlements, but for the most part, things are pretty similar. Now, when people come along with radical policy changes like Bernie Sanders or like Ron Paul, they get boxed out by either of the two-party elites. So, like I was saying, if you are someone who supports democracy, and if you think democracy is a good thing, sit down and write out a list of what you think would have to be the case in order for democracy to be in effect, for it to be happening, for it to work. The major problems are, of course, the media. They all agree with each other, and they vet every candidate. If they don't agree with you, they just don't cover you. That's a problem for democracy. The uniparty elite and how they agree on everything. And then finally, the engagement of the voter with the political system. Now, this last one is probably the most long-standing or most understood critique of democracy, and even political theorists talk about this. If the voter doesn't know what the issues are, if the voter isn't educated, maybe the voter isn't even that smart, whatever, all these different cognitive issues that come into play. How can the voter make an informed choice, which it seems like democracy would have to demand? Well, there's a whole bunch of explanations which are like, The voter doesn't necessarily know themselves, but they take cues from a bunch of other social organizations and their family members and the media and all this kind of stuff. But you can see with the social atomization that we've been experiencing over the past 70 years in America, the social organizations really don't exist anymore. Your family's in the exact same position you are, and the media has a stranglehold on all the candidates and issues. So we're really in a tight spot, and you're in a really difficult position if you're going to have to defend democracy in America, because it doesn't really seem like it could be working. Doesn't seem like it even could be. America, of course, goes around telling many other countries in the world that they are not upholding democratic values, which, of course, as I'm trying to lay out here, seems to be quite comical when our own ability to achieve functioning democratic processes seems suspect at best. Thank you for your time.